By the way, this is the rural area where I'm living, so it helps you to understand the context. That's my home, and where we developed the network. And maybe you in this room you already know a bit about what GifiNet is and what we do. Let me say. But let me start with something, because there is only 12 minutes, right? So I want to be clear and specific and within the context and the regulation and the commons. Our experience started, Leandro mentioned it, 2009 we started the fiber from the farms. So we connected one farm of pigs with another farms of cows, and several farms with 1 gigabit bandwidth between them. But then we need access to the backbone. We did that with a matter of weeks. It was not complicated to lay a cable over the field, so it was very easy. In the picture that we saw, just laying a cable over the aerial post in that particular case, right? So that was very, very easy. The problem was the regulation on accessing the gateway, because by having that, then we need to also go to Barcelona, to the interchange, for getting the gateway, right? And the fiber was already there, was owned by the government. So we don't have to lay another cable. But was not enabled the way for us as citizens, because GifiNet, we are a citizen-driven initiative. So there was no way, simply, no legal way to get access to that already existing fiber. The funny thing, and that's good to explain as an example, that we went to the government, actually there were 2 fibers already in that place. One was owned by the Spanish government and the other by the Catalan government. One was by the railways and other by the roads. Okay, so we went to the Spanish government first. We asked it. We want to use the fiber that is already there. It was being already used by the university and the hospitals and so on. And they were asking 500,000 euros for renting, which was almost impossible. Something that never was also not paid by the hospitals and the already users, so was an unfair price. So it was one that the nice, more than it cost. I mean, it was rental. For doing 1 kilometer fiber, it's just 300,000 euros, and you can deploy another cable through the railway. So it was something really stupid. Then we go to the Catalan government, and they say there is no fiber. And the fiber was there because we were able to do it. Then after a few meetings, we say, okay, if it's not, we are going to take the fiber. We are responsible. They said, no, stop, because maybe the transit or whatever, some public safety things, rules apply, and come on, so don't do that. And that, I say that we started in 2009, and it took a few weeks to connect the farms. At the end, we got connected in 2012. And you don't know what happened in 2012. It was not that the regulation was cleared. It was that we went to the government and we said, okay, we are tired of discussing with you. So on Sunday afternoons, we are going to use the tractors and we're going to do a protest to force the things to legislation and regulation to change. So it's not going to be violent. We're not going to disturb people working. It's going to be on Sunday afternoon, so we will only disturb the people going to skiing from the city to the Pyrenees, because we were in between. Okay, and we said, and then with a couple of months later, we were able to access the fiber and have the access to the backbone. What I mean is that it's not just about, when talking about community networks, which is very important, about sharing the internet and liability because of that. I mean, in the real world is that we are absolutely illegal in all. Because there are no ways for us to access the public domains, and now I'm trying to talk about the GifiNet experience when laying a cable. And also that's important because in the evening, last evening news that I was getting from Catalonia, although we are non-partisan, non-political, non-governmental, non-conflict of interest, we are civil society, right? And we are, so we are feeding from citizens. So our major cooperators are people, because we're non-political, say that, but the people there, for instance, you know the situation right now in Catalonia, right? And it's in our DNA, let's say, that things on freedom of speech, network neutrality, all of these things are, in our DNA, let's say. And the organizations that are cooperating with us, one of them, for instance, is Omnium, which is one of. And yesterday was getting to jail. So I just want Jordi, this guy. I mean, he's not a violent guy. He's not a terrorist. Nothing. Just is defending. It's from this organization. Is an independentist. That's the crime that they did, and because of this crime, now got in jail. So we're really scared of, I was giving you an example of having to fight the regulations and the laws by doing civil protests with no violence, and a way to get the results of that. Maybe I can agree with Jordi or not with his ideology about independentism, but what I cannot understand is that Jordi being in jail for just defending that thing. And now, just finishing the word, I want to say very clear and statements about regulations and actually what we do now. If we want internet everywhere, with almost same cost everywhere, I mean, thinking that there are urban and rural areas everywhere in Europe, but also worldwide, for sure, there need things to happen. And first thing that I want to say, and very clear, it's not an utopia. With fiber, I can do thousands of kilometers with a speed like that, and without losing a megabyte in between, right? And also now other technologies can appear. So it is possible. It's not an utopia, and we can do. We need to work on something, but it is possible. But for sure, and well, what's happening if we don't do is that we will have digital divide because of economic reasons, because of territorial reasons, because living in certain places. So it's important that we have to solve that. And everybody knows the problem of the market fiber that's happening. So we need to solve that. And if we make a step back and we think on it, we can take very simple conclusions that for reach everywhere in the planet or in Europe and in rural areas, whatever, will not be hundreds of infrastructure reaching every single square meter in between. So sharing infrastructure is a must. Maybe the big cities will have several providers and so on, but in rural areas, although fiber is very cheap, probably is the cheapest service. Is much more expensive electricity, water, drinking water, and whatever, right? And fiber is so cheap. So, but it's not. We could not expect have several fibers, in every rural area for having several providers. So, yes or yes. The infrastructure can be there, like electricity and water, because it is already there, but we will have to share the infrastructure. And yes or yes, what's happening, and particularly in the telco industry, or the telco sector, is there is lots of economic of interest. We were talking about monopolies and so on, and we cannot be naive, right? In terms of economics, when there is economic of interest, it is in the economic interest to block competition, for example, if they can. And there is lots of ways to block. I was giving some examples what the Spaniards were doing us when trying to use the already public infrastructure. There is a lot of rules that they could apply to block others to participate. So, and typically we're facing two types of techniques. One is overbuilding. Overbuilding is that, okay, we were deploying in Gurb, which is a rural municipality of less than 2,000 inhabitants, and Telefónica, the first village to deploy fiber in Catalonia. It was Gurb, not Barcelona, right? So, and that's overbuilding, and in a place that we already deployed the fiber. So that's making another infrastructure, and they are actually who are getting the more funding from the European Union for universal access and so on. We didn't get a single euro for infrastructure, but they are getting, and they are using that money for that. And it's speculation. When there is an economic interest, there is speculation, yes or yes. So that's happened. So how to solve that? And actually, very simple, and that's the conclusion that I want to deliver this morning, is that, okay, the regulation is not really, I said. But what really weird is that to think that community networks are not legal. And in fact is what's happening when we're trying to fight with the municipalities, to fight how we have to access the public domain. So there is a need of a regulation, and that regulation will never be neutral if don't explicitly recognize that the network infrastructure can be a common goods. Also, so not only private assets. Because of liberalization, which is the principles of the single market and so on, very often are saying, no, that's liberalizing, so that's only following private principles. Okay, yes, that's right, that's fine. But when we as citizens, we are building infrastructure, and those infrastructure are not private managed, but in an inclusive. Yolanda mentioned, the difference between extractive economy and inclusive economy. When you are developing by private initiative infrastructures as in commons, which is not extractive but inclusive economy, that should be explicitly be recognized by the regulation at all levels, and be important. Differentiate that the private is not the same. An infrastructure which is a common good that an infrastructure that is a private has to do in terms of taxes, in terms of. I'm not saying that needs to happen a positive discrimination, which many of the people will very like so, but just to have equal opportunities, at least they have to be distinguished. Because if they are not distinguished, we are dead. Because of what I tell you before, community networks can never ever fight with big economic interests like that have too much power in terms of speculative power and overbuilding power. Have nothing to do, nothing. So if a regulation does not explicitly recognize that, so the people are 100% sure that, okay, maybe regulation can be improved, but has to be no doubt that is legal, that is something good to happen, and that is different. Because what's really stupid is to, in the real world, find a fight with a local authority that is, confusing between something which is private owned and something which is a common good. I mean, and that's happening in the real world because regulation quite often doesn't mention. That makes a difference between one thing and yes or yes. Again, since the infrastructure needs to be shared, and one thing is the best way to share an infrastructure is to have it as a common good, and that needs to happen. So, will be no solution for having internet everywhere with a variety of alternatives and fair cost if there is no infrastructure as in commons. That's it. Sorry for.
So we move to the last